All right, everyone, doing the deep dive here for the Week 3 NFL prop bets. Now, last week we did this video as well, and we gave you guys a 5 out of 6 and a 6 out of slip bet last week. So hopefully we can do that again. And the way that we were able to do that was by going through the game-by-game process and just finding out which bets maybe stood out the most. Okay, so that's what we're going to go ahead and do here. We're going to start with the Los Angeles Chargers versus the Minnesota Vikings. If you guys are looking for a game to stack, this could very well be the game to stack, okay? Looking at the injury situations, nothing too much there for the Minnesota Vikings. I guess it is noteworthy that they did trade for Cam Akers. If you guys have been following this channel, you know I've been not hyping Cam Akers at all. I was hyping actually Ronnie Rivers a little bit, now the second string running back for the LA Rams, who looked really good in the preseason, but I also was saying, you know, Kyren Williams is the RB2 there. And I mentioned drafting both of them in best balls as well. So that's my long way of saying I don't think Cam Akers is really going to be a big factor here. I actually think Ty Chandler is still going to be the RB2 there. Maybe Akers will offer a little bit more out of the backfield catching the ball. We will see. Needless to say, though, I feel like Madison is still going to be a good option. Madison ran into his toughest opponents that he will in the first 2 weeks. And now if you look at their schedule, the Chargers, that's going to be a matchup that a good running back should be able to take advantage of. So that's really my long way of saying, you know, maybe we're going to find a prop bet for him. Maybe his lines actually went down a little bit. We'll see. And then for the Chargers side of the football, we are waiting on news for Austin Eckler. He is currently listed as no timetable for return. The issue with that is it's Austin Eckler, and he could have that tag and then not practice all week and maybe play on Sunday. Like, we don't know. I'm assuming that he's going to be out, though. That's just the assumption I think we should all go with. And I would say the line kind of tells us that as well. I would say maybe the Chargers would be favored to win if Eckler was active, although we can see very high over and under, 54.5 for an over and under, or sorry, 53.4 for an over and under. And if we look across the guys, we are getting some interesting lines in general. So if this is a game where you guys maybe are trying to shop the best lines, there's potential there. But when we get into the top props that are currently available for the Chargers, we're going to see Justin Herbert over rush yards is actually a decent one. We can see the sportsbook line has it basically a little bit less than a push at 9.5, projected at 9.7. Underdog has it at 9.7. We can see that is a slight edge that we are getting there. I typically don't like rolling with those ones too much, but if you guys wanted to, you could. We're actually seeing Keenan Allen for under 75.5 for the PrizePicks line for receiving yards. I don't know if I exactly agree with that, but I will say for both Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I'm hoping that we get a good receptions-based prop for them. Last week, we saw Keenan Allen continue his on average 10 targets per game with Justin Herbert as his quarterback, and he was able to get 8 receptions. Okay, I would say this has a strong likelihood to be a push, but also this is going to be a good matchup. And actually, we are getting a receptions prop for Keenan, and I just had a refresh on my end. We can see that's basically going to be a 50-50 split. I would say that is correct, but we will see that now the best one to me is actually going to be Mike Williams for over 4.5 receptions. The only worry that I have is that he's projected to get 3.9. The sportsbook has it set at 4.5. Underdog has the line set at 4.5. I would say this does make for a much better bet. I would say I won the sportsbook as an individual bet, but also I do think that this one makes sense. Let's go ahead and show you guys why. So first, I think it's worth calling out the amount of snaps he played in week 2. Played 90% of the snaps, you know, barely leaving the field there. And you might see this snap count share in week 1. That's because he was being checked for concussion, so he didn't play his full allotment of snap. And then on top of that, Mike Williams was operating a majority of his routes out of the slot, and we saw that lead to a ton of targets. Guys, the two matchups should be very similar between Miami and also Tennessee. Now, with Austin Eckler active in week 1, they were able to rush the football a decent amount, and they should be able to do that again in week 2 against Minnesota. But really, however you choose to attack Minnesota, you should be able to do so. So thus, I do think Mike Williams for over 4.5 receptions is actually going to be one of my favorite ones on the day. Just operating out slot, should be able to get enough targets there and just enough production there as well. Factor in Austin Eckler probably not being out, that's going to lead to, you know, a couple of those shorter routes, maybe going to Mike Williams, or maybe just one of those that typically wouldn't, and we'll take that. And then from there, because we're not getting that many props there for the Chargers just yet, let's go ahead and get into Minnesota now. So for Minnesota, I do want to point this out. This is a number that has risen at the start of the week. I did really like it, and I still think that there is some meat left on the bone here for the over receiving yards here. It's just such a high number. The only way I'd be going out of my way to use this one is probably stacking with Kirk Cousins and maybe like doing a real just big game stack, betting on that game over and under being high. How does it get that high? Well, the star players are the ones that are showing up. And so part of the reason why we like this game is because we look at Justin Jefferson and the rest of the Minnesota Vikings. This is going to be the best matchup on the slate when looking at DVP, both in yards. Look at this, yards almost 100 more yards given up, and they still have given up a bunch of touchdowns. We look at receptions. The receptions could be a little bit higher, I would say, but who cares when they're giving up that much yards? That's a lot of production given up to receivers. Now, they had a difficult matchup in week 1, but the Titans were able to kind of get what they wanted to get out of their offense based off of their structure, based off of their strengths out of the Chargers. So I do think the Vikings are going to be able to really go out and dominate. So, but once again, the only way I'm going to go ahead and use this one is if I'm stacking. And let's look at the cheat sheet here. Yeah, it's still showing that we have a little, like I said, like a little bit of meat on that bone there, but not too much. Only 101.2 is the average sportsbook line. So before, I believe I got this line at like 98 at the start of the week, maybe a little bit less than that. Yeah, we don't need to go crazy with that one now. And I know that it's not showing this one as like a good prop to go with just yet. But KJ Osborne, guys, he was someone that I was talking up for last week's video. The showdown game that the Minnesota Vikings had. And he is someone that came through, both hit his over yards and came through for DFS as well, but he should have had a better game. I mean, he had 2 bad drops in that game. And the biggest question that I have is that going to lead to more playing time eventually for Jordan Addison? As it sits right now, it really hasn't. I mean, Addison played in 69% of the snaps last week. That's a big increase from what he played the previous week. That is great. But until Addison starts to see consistent, or really starts to dip into KJ Osborne snaps, then I think when these lines are as different as they are compared to them, I think KJ Osborne is actually the one that makes the most sense for over receiving yards. He's just on the field a lot. Should have had a much better game last week. And I never like saying should have because he didn't. I mean, the reason why he didn't is because he had 2 bad drops. Like, we don't like that. But once again, there's a decent stacking opportunity here. Maybe KJ Osborne, Kirk Cousins, and then you could potentially do Justin Jefferson for over receiving yards in the games and then run it back with maybe Mike Williams reception. I wish we were getting a TJ Hawkinson reception prop. We're not. We're not getting any Madison lines as well. So let's go ahead and move on into the next game. The next game that we got is going to be the Tennessee Titans versus the Cleveland Browns, a team that should be a very easy team to pass on is the Titans. So Cleveland should be able to pass. We're probably going to be looking at some passing-based props for them. Obviously, we look at the Browns. They are pretty banged up. One I want to call out is going to be Zadarius Smith as well. If he is inactive, that actually could lead to some easier pass attempts for Ryan Tannehill for Titans. That could be something we're looking at. But the biggest takeaway is Nick Chubb's going to be out. I think that might actually lead to a few more passing attempts for Deshaun Watson. Obviously, Jerome Ford's going to be there. Then we look at this side of the football, the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry currently questionable. I think we're expecting him to play. We look at the Titans, DeAndre Hopkins currently questionable. I think we expect him to play. So for the Titans, I do want to call out kind of their strange snap shares that they had in week 2. And we'll look at it and we'll see very much spread out. We did see a lot more 12 personnel, and that's because the game was close. Thus, Derrick Henry was able to stay on the field a little bit longer. And then we saw much less of Tajay Spears. Probably going to be what happens again. Remember, that spread is set at 3.4 with about a 40 over and under. So to me, that tells us that this snap share that we saw is probably going to be the one we want to go on the most for the Titans. Now, what I'm actually very interested in is seeing how many snaps. Okay, we don't have it just yet. Let's see if I can find this somewhere else. The snap share for the Cleveland Browns. I want to know how many Amari Cooper played. All right, so I'm looking this one up on RotoWire. 74% of the snaps we'll see in week 1. He didn't play that much as well, snap share wise. So I don't think we need to worry about the snaps that much for Cooper. That groin injury seems to be a non-factor in terms of playing time. Thus, his production should be there. So for Tennessee, as it sits right now, we can see we're not getting really that many props or good props for them. Basically just Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry. That's because Hopkins is currently injured. We don't know if he's going to play. And so for me, it does feel like more of a stay away here for the Titans. Now, there is a chance that maybe, I was going to say there's a chance we might get a good fantasy prop on Tannehill. I don't think that's going to hold up to be true. So let's look at Cleveland because I'm hoping that we get some good lines on them. So for the Browns, we got Elijah Moore. This is an interesting line. We can see, wow. Okay, so PrizePicks has the line set at 39.5 for receiving yards for Elijah Moore. We can see Underdog has the line set at 37.5. We can see the projection data has it set at 39, and we can see the Sportsbook has it set at 36.8. This is a very interesting one to me because I want to call this out. I'm betting Cooper for over receiving yards, and I would say the two kind of correlate, but let's look at the two. We know Amari Cooper played through an injury. It didn't seem like he was actually going to play in week 1, and he did. The reason why we're going to get some good lines on Cooper this week is because week 1 was a game in the rain, and looking back at it with the groin injury flaring up, he probably shouldn't have played in it. Had 7 targets in that game. We see last week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, had 10 targets, had a really good game. Okay, 7 receptions, 90 yards. Given the matchup with the Titans, and we'll see, this isn't going to be as fruitful as it was last year, but it still is. I mean, 30th easiest matchup or 3rd easiest matchup, depending on how you look at it. Receiving yards, 3rd most given up. Touchdowns, 5th most given up. 4th most given up. Receptions, 2nd most given up. So we can see this is going to be an easy matchup for pass catchers. So for Cooper, it becomes, do we want to do receptions or do we want to do receiving yards? We can see The 9-5 cheat sheet is actually telling us receiving yards is the best one. That's going to be because the projection has it set at 61.6. The average sportsbook line is favoring the over and is favoring the over at about 60 yards. I don't know. I would say either of these are the way to go. I think Cooper is going to see, honestly, probably a similar game to this, as long as that groin injury doesn't flare up. I like receptions a little bit more than I do receiving yards, although I don't really think it matters in this case. I will go receiving yards, I guess, because the data is telling us to, but if you guys want to go receptions, I get it. Then if we look at Elijah Moore, he has been getting a lot of targets, 7 targets, 9 targets in those 2 games. And so the lines that we're getting on him for the 39.5 receiving yards does make sense, and you would think he'd be able to get the over. At the same time, we are seeing that PrizePicks is a little bit higher than the rest of the industry. And there just seems to be a chemistry thing between Moore and Deshaun Watson. And maybe this is just a stay away, but I could see betting the under there. And then from there, what else do we got? Jerome Ford receiving yards. I feel like he's a little bit better of a pass catcher than is Nick Chubb. And a lot of people are going to be worried about Kareem Hunt signing there, about the production for Kareem Hunt. I don't really see that changing. I think he's going to fall into what was the old Kareem Hunt role, which is what we saw Jerome Ford in week 1. I think that's just going to be how it goes. Like, they had the choice between Ford, Johnson, Kareem Hunt. They chose Ford because they like him, okay? And he's looked good in the preseason. He looked good last week. Like, I feel like that's just who he is. And so in this game where you do want to be attacking them in the pass game, and I want to see here, do they give up a lot of receptions to running backs as well? Not yet. Okay, lowest actually for running backs. Let's see here, yards as well. Pretty low there. So, man, okay. I was going to say we might have something there, but it doesn't seem like it. And I would say the reason why this Titans matchup is as hard as it looks on paper is more so because it's easier to attack them in the passing game. That's just their weakness, so you might as well. And that's why I think Cleveland is going to, and that's why I really like the Amari Cooper prop. So, not too much there. Let's move on into this next game. We got the Houston Texans versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. A 43.3 over and under with the Jaguars favored by 8.5. I do find that to be interesting because, man, Trevor Lawrence is such an interesting quarterback because he looked terrible last week. You know, week 1 looked really good, and that's, you go back to the Chargers playoff game. We saw terrible Trevor Lawrence in the first half and really elite Trevor Lawrence in the second half. It is weird how like night and day it is with him. And until he's consistent, I don't know if we can actually trust him or the pass catchers. It does feel risky. That being said, that could create some nice stacking opportunities in general. Because if he's going to struggle, obviously the rest of the pass catchers are going to struggle as well. Let's go ahead and take a peek at any injury news here. For Jacksonville, not too much. Let's see for the Texans, not too much as well. Noah Brown is still out. All right, so that's, guys, matchup-wise, we do see that the Texans are still a team that you want to be targeting the running back with, and that's more for like touchdowns. They've given up 4 this far, which is actually the most, and that's, I don't know if that's just their offense typically being bad and you're just able to score touchdowns against them. I will say Zach Moss should have had a much better game than he did. He was bouncing off his own lineman, like missing the hole, and like the announcers were trying to talk it up. Well, he's running like Le'Veon Bell. I'm like, no, not really. He's just not that good, not having the best vision. And this was me after talking up Zach Moss as a good DFS play. This is me having him in my season-long league. I was actually discouraged by the game that Zach Moss had. Because I'm like, man, you put any good running back in there, and I'm not saying he's bad, but you put any running back there that's like one cut and go, and they have a massive game. Who's a one cut and go type of running back? That's Travis Etienne. And so we look at it. I am sad that 2 things. This number continues to get bumped up, and I'm sad that the under is slightly being favored here. So this is another one of the situations where I do think we are going to have a good opportunity to bet the over on the sports books. This makes for a better bet there than it does on PrizePicks, because we can see at 50% we're not gaining an edge on PrizePicks. That's the whole part of like PrizePicks and Underdog, is that we can gain an edge on them by chasing those bets that have about a 54% chance to hit. That is not this week. Now, guys, he still did play a lot of snaps last week, but they were down a little bit from week 1. And now why was that? He had some cramps, didn't really play that much in the fourth quarter. He only had 3 touches in the second half. And so we look at this game log for him, 12 rushes. I think we can probably give him a few more there, and he's probably a lot closer to getting the rushing yards number for this week. And the fact that he was able to run 477 in that week 1 matchup against Indy, which I think is a little bit more difficult to match, that's encouraging to me. He should be able to get over 70 rush yards. I just think it's a better bet on the sports. And now from there, we do see these lines for Calvin Ridley, Chris Kirk, which are just interesting numbers. And why are they interesting? We look at the snaps. We saw Chris Kirk get 81% of the snaps. We saw Zay Jones get 66. Okay, we saw their snap share flip. And I read that as more of like Chris Kirk is someone that you want, or Christian Kirk is someone that you want to get the ball into the short yard, get him in going in that sense. and that's how they chose to use him, whereas Zay Jones more of a downfield threat, and so they just chose to beat him up that way. And that might be the headache of the Jacksonville Jaguars this season, is that they have so many weapons here. Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram, Zay Jones, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, even Jamal Agnew as well. They like Tank Bigsby. Like, there's so many ways for them to attack teams that it might be more of a headache than we thought at the start of the season. And at the start of the year, I probably would have went in on Trevor Lawrence, maybe doing the over receiving or passing yards here stacked with Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley. I just don't think we can trust him. Like, that put such a sour taste in my mouth that we saw that from him. And until he cleans that up, it's just tough to trust the pass catchers there. So let's go ahead and move on to Houston. So for Houston, if you guys watch my DFS coverage, I mentioned that I thought CJ Stroud was very sharp in week 1 against Baltimore. And although the Colts were playing very much soft coverage when he got almost half of his passing yards, he was able to convert on those plays. Like, and he still looks sharp throwing the football, doing that. Like, can't take that away from him, albeit probably you could take away, if it was a close game, 100 of those passing yards at least. He's still good doing it. And so we are still probably getting a pretty good line on him. I'm curious about this matchup. Let's take a peek at it. What are quarterbacks averaging passing yards against them? Jaguars, okay, so not too bad. So not exactly a matchup that you want to stay away from. Okay, I like that. Now, we know that they've had tougher matchups on paper, the Jaguars, Patrick Mahomes last week, but maybe there's something there. And what I'm annoyed by is that we're not getting any Nico Collins props just yet. His receptions prop was set at 3.5 last week. And if we get that number again, guys, please just hammer it. I don't really get why it was that low. I kind of mentioned that. I'm like, this probably could be double it. I would still think it's decent. Like, the hate for Nico Collins is crazy. And what I also found crazy, though, I want to point this out, is that he was heavily targeted, okay? He only played in 62% of the snaps. Actually, Tank Dell played more, okay? So I think we could potentially see some interesting lines there as well. And I just want to show you guys, Tank Dell currently questionable. He had a good game, 10 targets, 7 receptions, a lot of yards and a touchdown. But Nico Collins, guys, he was someone that I've been talking up, and he continues to produce 9 targets, 11 targets. The yards are there, and I could easily see the yards being there again. Like, if we're forced into a bet for the Texans right now, I think I would go with Nico Collins for over receiving yards. Now, let's see if the data agrees. It does not. That's unfortunate. Okay, it's a 50-50 split. Once again, this would be another one of those bets that I think is just a better bet on one of the sports books. And by all means, like, you guys can be taking this advice and using it there. It doesn't have to just be for PrizePicks or just for Underdog. What I find interesting, and I hate this, is that we actually get Dameon Pierce is actually looking like a decent bet for over rush yards. And I will continue to say that Pierce looks good. And if I'm the Texans and I'm watching the film, I still think we need to try to find ways to get Pierce the ball, rushing the football, maybe short yardage catches. It is strange. I know their linemen, not the best, especially run game wise, but playing Pierce at only 45% of the snaps just feels like a mistake when you're watching the film and after the game as well. I get it. They don't think they have a strength in the run game, and CJ Stroud does look good. I get it. So that's my long way of saying I'm probably not touching that prop as well. Dalton Schultz has been disappointing. If you guys want to bet the under there, I definitely get it. We can see PrizePicks is the one that's liking him the most. I have 34.5 receiving yards, the rest of them 35.5, projected to get 30. Yeah, that's a decent one to bet the under on. And then from there, let's just move on into the next game. So we got the New England Patriots versus the New York Jets. Injury-wise for the Jets, not too much to touch on. Michael Carter currently questionable. That could actually lead to just more of a 50-50 split between Cook and also Breece Hall. Obviously, Breece Hall, you expect him to get more and more work as the season progresses. For the Patriots, nothing really to note, although Parker is still questionable. We'll see. The game over and under for this game is set at 36.5, so not a high-scoring game at all, and the Jets are 2.5-point dog. Now, I want to touch on something here. I'm going to start with the Patriots. I might have a couple of hot takes here in this game. Looking at the snap counts for the Patriots, I am so mad at what they did to Demario Douglas. I know he got benched because he fumbled, but like, it's pretty clear to me that Douglas is their best receiver, and they just need to get him on the field. Like, this whole punishing a guy for fumbling is just kind of played out. He is their best playmaker, maybe besides Stevenson. Get him on the field. And like, even the play that he fumbles on, it's just kind of like unlucky. Like, he makes a good move, thinks he has a good chance to score a touchdown there. Defender makes a smart heads up play by going for the football. Like, I don't really know how much more you're supposed to secure that ball. It's just really a good play by the defender there, like punches it out. And maybe that's my long way of saying pick him up in your season long leagues. That is something I have went out and done, just because to me, it's clear that he is going to be their Jacoby Myers. And with that being said, if he does get more snaps, that actually would make the whole Patriots more difficult to predict. You have Devontae Parker playing 100% of the snaps as well, and we thought that would happen. We thought Booty would not be active in play. That's exactly what happened. So the Parker questionable news might change some of the lines that we were getting, but I do think this was a mistake as well. Kendrick Bourne only played in 51% of the snaps. That was strange to me. And the reason being is we just saw a lot more 12 personnel on the field. I mean, basically 72% of the snaps were 12 personnel. And what was weird is that they did a poor job doing it as well. So it really depends where the Patriots are going to see the strength to attack that Jets defense. And if we look at it, the DVP, we will see Jets a little bit middle of the road, a little bit easier, I guess, for quarterbacks to attack. Look at running backs, basically the exact same thing. So we don't have to worry about a significant advantage one way or the other. We saw against the Eagles that they actually are pretty poor defensively against the pass. We know that with Miami, they're poor against the run. So it makes sense why the Patriots chose to attack him the way that they did. In this game, it feels like it's going to be a much more even split. And so let's just see the best props that we have. Stevenson for over 20.5 receiving yards. You could do that. I don't love the fact that the projection data doesn't like it as much, but we can see the sportsbook lines are giving him 2.5 more yards, and they are still slightly favoring. Well, that's basically a push there. So not a terrible one. You could roll with that one. Rush yards it likes as well for Stevenson. But for me, I don't know if I really want to target them too much. And it's probably game flow dependent as well. I doubt the Jets are going to get up, and you probably do want to just do Stevenson for over rush yards because they probably will trot out a lot of 12 personnel. But other than that, it does feel like a stay away. Let's go ahead and take a peek at the Jet. And guys, I kind of feel bad for Zach Wilson. Just go on Twitter or just any social media that you have, or even TV. Compare how Zach Wilson is getting treated after last week compared to Justin Fields. For Justin Fields, it's, oh, the coaches are laying him down. The organization's laying him down. For Zach Wilson, it's he's not the guy. And Zach Wilson played so much more better than Justin Fields did last week. And it was by far his best game. And I know he threw 3 picks. And some people are like listening to this that probably didn't catch the game and probably have been seeing all that media and they're like, dude, you don't know what you're talking about. On film, he looked good. Okay, I know the completion percentage isn't there. He had some drops. If anyone failed him, it's his offensive weapons and it's the coaching in this game, because he really did have it going for 3.5 quarters of the game. He threw 1 terrible pick that he shouldn't have thrown. And the other 2, I don't really blame him. Garrett Wilson had a chance to go up, and I thought it was a perfectly placed ball by Zach Wilson, a deep bomb in between 2 defenders. Garrett Wilson, instead of going up to try to catch the football, really like becomes a defender. And in my head, I'm like, if that's Aaron Rodgers, he makes that catch and scores a touchdown on it. It's just like a weird, it's like it was because Zach Wilson was throwing the football that they didn't like it. So what does that mean for prop wise? Well, if Zach Wilson does play that good again, I think they are probably leaving that film saying, man, we messed up with that. We probably should have thrown the football a little bit more. And he rushed the football well as well. And maybe this is the prop that we go with. Now, I know that the under saying bet the under for rush attempts, but it won't be surprising to see maybe 2 plays designed for him to rush the football. I mean, after that, we probably don't want to be touching any of these. I would say yes. Tyler Conklin for under receiving yards. I actually like that one. Now, don't get me wrong. Zach Wilson was targeting him because he was basically the only one he could trust at the end of the game. But I do think under receiving yards makes sense there for him. And that's the theme here, is really heavily favoring the under. Now, moving on into the next game here, we have the New Orleans Saints versus the Green Bay Packers. We're going to see that the average sportsbook odds has the line set about 42.5, with the Green Bay Packers favored by 1.5 points. Okay, I'm going to tell you this much right now. This game could very much be dictated by whether or not Aaron Jones is active, whether or not Christian Watson is active, whether or not Elton Jenkins is active, or David Bakhtiari. Last week was a good example of this. I think if literally one of those players are active, they win. If all of them are active, that game is, I don't want to say it's a blowout, but it probably is a blowout, okay? That matters, okay? You take out literally, besides Jordan Love, your best offensive players, that stuff matters. When you need a yard at the end of the game to seal the victory and you can't get it, yes, that's partially due to A.J. Dillon there, and they probably should have got it, but little stuff like that adds up. So if they're all out, I don't want to say the Saints have a chance of winning because they shouldn't, but I guess it wouldn't be shocking at the same time. I don't know. That line seemed weird because if one of those players are active, I do think they're going to win by more, but you never know. Looking at the Saints, obviously they're going to be without Jamal Williams. We know that. Most likely. Okay, I shouldn't say we know he's out for sure. He's most likely going to be out. And then it's really just depends on, is it going to be Kendre Miller or Tony Jones? And will that matter at all prop-wise for us? I don't really think so. And so for the Saints, let's just take a peek at which props we have currently available on the 9-to-5 cheat sheet, and we're not getting any reception-based props. I am very curious to see what we get for Michael Thomas. His reception props that we have gotten lately have been pretty low. Both games have been kind of strange where we have seen the emphasis go to getting the ball to Michael Thomas early on, and then later on as the game progresses, they make an emphasis on getting the ball to Chris Olave. We will see. This is a fun defensive matchup. Just you have the Green Bay Packers secondary, which is pretty good against Chris Olave, Michael Thomas. That's fun. Shaheed, who's obviously looked pretty good as well. So a kind of a fun matchup there. And now that I think about it, maybe this game has a better chance of the over 42.5. Just both offenses seem to be pretty good. But to me, that's going to be a fun matchup. Now, props wise, I don't really feel like we need to be touching any of these. And actually, I could see a path in which we are betting the under here. This is a 5-yard passing yard difference, which, you know, might not be that much, but between underdog and PrizePicks, that could add up. And then we see the projection data. Projection data doesn't really like Derek Carr. Vegas is also projecting the under there for 241.5. So it would suggest that PrizePicks is a little bit too high here. So it does make sense why all the other receiving based props are also suggesting that we should bet the under. This seems like a decent stacking opportunity for the unders if you guys agree with that. Guys, for the Packers, the toughest thing that we have been seeing is that we are just not getting enough lines on the Packers player, okay? And that's because we keep not getting the injury news that we would like to have, okay? Like the only one that we have is going to be Jordan Love, and who knows, maybe we get another rushing yard prop at 12.5 and maybe we can attack that one. He was one of the best fantasy score prop ones that we had as well. That is something that, as I'm recording this right now, we don't have that many fantasy score props. That is something I'll touch on in the Saturday video when it's more of a straightforward video rather than the deep dive. And for what it's worth, I do want to touch on this because when you look at the quarterback matchup, it would suggest that this is a tough one going against the Saints. They haven't really played anyone that would make it seem tough. Bryce Young, Ryan Tannehill, I'm not too worried about those two quarterbacks really throwing the ball a lot, getting a lot of yards, getting a lot of production. So I feel like this game is going to be very telling, especially if Jordan Love does get Watson back, especially if he does get Aaron Jones or one of those linemen back. That's going to be more telling of, is this the matchup that we actually having to stay away from or not? Now, on the flip side of that, I'm actually curious about the Green Bay Packers as well, because they kind of, I don't want to say they got exposed because that Atlanta rush offense is just elite. Every team knows that they're going to try to rush the football, and the Packers couldn't stop. So very interesting there. I will say when we look at this, the Packers have given up 128 receiving yards to running backs as well. So maybe there's something there. Let's go ahead and move on into the next game now. We got Denver Broncos versus the Miami Dolphins. We can see the Miami Dolphins are going to be favored by 6.5 points. This is a game that has a 47.9 average over and under, so 48. Expected to be a high scoring game. And this is where I do think maybe we have the potential to do a little bit of a game stack as well. The biggest news that we are kind of hoping for in this game is whether or not Jalen Waddle is going to play. He's currently questionable with a concussion. Ahmed also is currently questionable with a groin injury. If he misses, that's just going to mean a lot more work for Mostert, and maybe not a lot more work, but locking in his production, locking in his workload. And I would rather phrase it that way because if we look at his snaps, I do think this is what we're going to see. 70 to 75% of the snaps working in another back person there. You know, it would probably be Devon Achane getting some work there this week, who, guys, I do think he is kind of Mostert 2.0. Once he starts to get down that offensive system, I do think we're going to slowly see this tick down for Mostert. Now, we will see that the Denver Broncos are actually going to be a pretty good matchup for running backs that can catch the pass out of the backfield. Now, this is, I shouldn't exactly say that because it's only 114 receiving yards and on 8 catches like these other teams. Maybe that's been a weakness where teams have been attacking in the passing game. This is probably just 1 or 2 big plays there. I don't recall exactly, but that they don't look like too great, I will say. Like the Denver defense, I expected a little bit more out. As for the opposite side of the football, we are seeing that the Denver Broncos running backs are going to probably have a pretty nice opportunity in this game. Whether that be Javonte Williams or Samaje Perine, we'll see if we are getting any good props for them. And for what it's worth, I don't think that their pass defense is good, as it kind of indicates right here. I think this is just more situation of they're just worse against the run, so teams are running on them. Once again, when we look at the snap counts, I do think we could see both Braxton Berrios and River Craycraft get some more work if we do get news that Jalen Waddle's out. For Tyreek Hill, tough to say exactly if his volume is going to go up at all because it's hard to do that. And Durham Smythe still basically playing 100% of the snaps. He's someone DFS-wise I like. I don't know if I'm going to like any props on him. Then we just look at the Denver snap counts here. Cortland Sutton, guys, he is playing a bunch of snaps. Last week, he was one of the best reception props that we were getting at over 3.5. And it took a while for him to get there, but he ended up getting 5, I think, on 7 targets. I think that's going to be the norm. I don't really get that number that we're getting on him. Adam Troutman actually saw an increase in snaps last week, which does make sense with Greg Dulcich getting banged up. And then from there, the week 2 snaps were pretty much spread out. Brendan Johnson actually had a decent game. Samaje Perine about 50. Javonte Williams about 50. Jerry Jeudy played in 68% of the snaps, but you wouldn't have noticed it. And then on the flip side, that Marvin Mims Jr. played in only 24% of the snaps, and you would have thought those two flipped. Mims had a pretty good game. He had a big return as well. It'll be interesting to see kind of how the snaps start to get spread out amongst all those players, because it's kind of clear Sean Payton doesn't really trust the young rookie yet, and that's why he's going with LJ Humphrey and Brandon Johnson a little bit more, it seems like. And Brandon Johnson, he did get lucky with that last play catch, but I actually thought he looked decent. So let's see, for the Denver Broncos, what kind of props are we getting here? Actually, I want to call this out for underdog. This might be a situation where we can bet the over receiving yards on underdog, but obviously on PrizePicks, when we're looking at it in that regard, not going to be one that's popping up there for you. Russell Wilson, we see that the under is being pretty heavily favored there for him for under 3.5 rushing attempts. Cornson, this is one I want to call out. I think I like this one, and this is another one where it's a better prop bet on the other sports books than on PrizePicks, and I just want to call this out. Like, we already saw that he was a leading snap getter. I personally think that he is their receiver number one. He had 4 catches in the first game, 5 in the second game. He had more targets in the second game. I would say this is going to be their best matchup, and if that game is higher scoring, that might lead to some easier passes for him as the game progresses, as Miami gets the lead, as Vegas sees this game going. That should lead to some easier routes. And I would say the biggest kind of flaw that they had, why they let up the lead, is they needed to get him going. They needed to move the chains. He's their best receiver. 3.5 receptions just seems way too low for him, especially when we know he's going to get that target share. Like, that's nothing new. And I hate that it's telling us to bet the under. That's unfortunate there. And even the projection data is suggesting that as well. Don't love that. Once again, better bet on the sportsbook. Then Adam Trautman. Yeah, I actually think this is a pretty kind of sneaky good one there as well. So I think we can predict that Trautman's going to play about 80% of the snaps. Okay. I'll pull up his game log here for you guys. Only 1 target against Washington. But we look at that week 1 game against Las Vegas, 5 receptions, 5 targets, 34 yards. And then we take a peek at, potentially looking at tight ends being a good matchup for Denver, and we see that it could be. So maybe they try to exploit that matchup. Washington, for what it's worth, through 2 games is one of the tougher matchups for opposing tight ends. So it wouldn't be shocking. Like, you get there in 1 catch. Then from there, nothing too much for Denver. Miami, let's see what we have. Rush attempts. Under 2.5 rush attempts. This might be one that you want to take. 54.8% chance for that one to hit. Yeah, that's a good EV bet. Okay. From there, Tyreek Hill. Wow, this is kind of interesting. Only 6.5 receptions. I say only, right? Like, that's a high number. That's a little bit shocking, though. It's a little bit of sticker shock there for me. Mostert, I guess it wouldn't be shocking to see him get over those rushing yards. I would say all these lines seem to be pretty accurate. And that's indicated by 50% there. It's like 50-50 pretty much. Let's go ahead and move on into the next game. All right, so now we got the Buffalo Bills versus the Washington Commanders. The Commanders are 6-point dogs, and this is crazy this week. We have a lot of games that are almost a full touchdown difference. Okay, so a lot of games that have the potential to be a blowout. It's a 43 over and under. Injury wise that we need to pay attention to: Dawson Knox, currently questionable with the back injury. Obviously that could lead to some more snaps for Dalton Kincaid, most likely. A little bit of different roles for those two. They have been on the field together. For the Washington Commanders, we do see that Logan Thomas is currently questionable. And when we look at the snaps for the Buffalo Bills last week, we see that Dawson Knox 71% as opposed to 84%, and Kincaid was also down. That seemed to come at the result of both this game being a blowout, but also maybe they just saw it more of a game in which they wanted 11 personnel, 10 personnel instead of like 12 personnel. And we actually saw Latavius Murray outsnap Damian Harris, although not by much, right? This is probably going to be a 50-50 split between those two, while James Cook still demands about 60% of the snap. For Washington, let's just pull this up because I find it interesting. Terry McLaurin actually saw his snaps drop a little bit. We know he has been dealing a little bit with the injury, but I don't think there's too much of a concern. The biggest takeaway here is that the tight end replacement for Logan Thomas was actually John Bates instead of the impressive preseason stud at tight end Cole Turner. So something to monitor there. It does seem like it's going to be John Bates though. And then we did see Brian Robinson Jr. only play in 52% of the snaps. He had himself a really good game. Antonio Gibson, on the flip side, played in 48% of the snaps. So he is someone that I actually saw a higher snap share. They were kind of playing from behind and then got the lead. Brian Robinson has looked good. Antonio Gibson, honestly, has looked good as well when he's not making mental mistakes when he gets the ball in his hand. Let's put it that way. But we'll see this based off the snap shares that we're getting. Maybe Jahan Dotson is someone that we're looking at for a prop, but based off the snaps being as spread out as there, might be difficult to find a good prop in this game. Like, I look at snaps like I look at minutes in the NBA. The more minutes for someone, the more consistent they are in terms of production. I guess the more reliable or easy to predict. I guess that'd be the way to describe it. So for Washington, we have Sam Howell's rush yards, and this is interesting. Vegas is favoring the over at about 52%. at 12.5, which is the line that we're getting on PrizePicks. The projection data actually likes a little bit more at 17.8. So 52% chance for that one to hit. The one that I personally like, and I'm a little bit surprised that the day doesn't like it a little bit more, Jahan Dotson for over 3.5 receptions. He is someone that I thought coming into the season was similar to Nico Collins, where getting disrespected for both receptions and season-long leagues. We actually saw Dotson's ADP rise because of that Terry McLaurin injury at the start of the season, or in the preseason. But the sportsbooks are still saying, no, we don't respect his game, and this probably they don't respect Sam Howell's game. And this is going to be another one of those situations in which it's probably a better prop bet on the sportsbooks. I'm sick of saying that, but man, it just seems to be one of those days. We saw week 1 against Arizona, 7 targets, ended up getting 5 receptions in that one. Last week, it seemed like he was going to get there. I think he had like 2 receptions on the first drive and then really not much attention throughout the game. Only 5 targets. Still almost got there, right? I would say more times than not, I think he's going to average over 3.5 receptions per game. But let's call that out. It's going to be a better bet, I would say, in the sportsbook, just percentage-wise, than it is on PrizePicks. Now let's check out the Buffalo Bills, and here's another one where we are gaining a very big edge. Josh Allen for over 1.5 passing touchdowns. Now, the only worry, I guess, of this would be the potential for that Jalen Hurts one, where he gets 2 rushing touchdowns on the 1 yard line instead of throwing for it. But that's just a very good EV bet that we have. And then we also see this one being a pretty good one. James Cook for over 53.5 rushing yards. We can see Vegas has it set at 54.2. The projection data actually really likes him. And we know Washington should be a tough matchup. So I find this line to be very interesting. Jets front is supposed to be difficult. That's why he probably struggled. And then Las Vegas, an easy front, probably why he had a good game. So, I mean, it's only like a 51.4% chance to hit. Probably not a bet that we need to force. Want to call this one out as well for Diggs on Underdog. That's probably going to be a good bet for the under because it's already a good bet, a good bet for the over on Underdog because it's already a good bet for the over on Prize. Okay, we can see that pretty easily there. So we got a good EV bet there in Josh Allen for over passing TDs. Let's go ahead and move on into the next game. All right, the next game here is going to be Atlanta versus Detroit. Detroit are 3-point favorites, which I find to be interesting, just given the fact that Atlanta just beat the Green Bay Packers and given the fact that they're without David Montgomery. It is a 46.2 over and under, so kind of a higher scoring game there. Falcons aren't really banged up in terms of like what we need to worry about. And then on the flip side of it, the Detroit Lions, we got Josh Reynolds banged up. We got ASB banged up. Obviously, David Montgomery. He's out. I'm actually curious. I had not seen the Josh Reynolds news yet. Let's see what his injury is. Limited in practice on Thursday, so obviously limited. You probably expect him to play. ASB, I do find it to be interesting because he was kind of used as a decoy as the game progressed. We don't exactly know what the injury was. We saw a knee, we saw a toe, we saw cramps. We don't know what it is. And so with us not knowing what his injury is, if we're getting any prop bets for him, we're probably just staying away from it. Now, what I want to call out is that the Lions are going to present some good matchups for really all the Hawks players, the Atlanta Falcons players. We got Kyle Pitts getting seemingly the best matchup for tight end. Receiving wise, it does drop a little bit, but we wouldn't probably want to be targeting any of their receivers anyways. And then running back wise, it is kind of interesting. Like the Lions haven't given up too much production to opposing running backs, but at the same time, I do think that the Atlanta Falcons are going to be able to get theirs against them. We see this 2.97 yards per carry. That would probably make you worried about Bijan Robinson, but let's go ahead and take a peek at his snap counts because that kind of tells a different story. We saw Robinson's snap counts actually go up last week, as it should. He looked good, and I would say that decision is why they won that game. Tyler Algier actually saw a little bit less snaps there. I would say that this is probably the correct split, and the split that we all expected to see at the start of the season and the split that we expect to see for the rest of this. With that, we end up seeing a lot of Jonnu Smith, almost the same amount of snaps as Kyle Pitts. We're going to see a lot of tight ends mixed in there so that they can get their run game going. That's just what we should expect. And so the unfortunate side of that is, although we'd probably want to go in on Kyle Pitts, maybe if we get a good prop for him, they spread it out. So it wouldn't be surprising to see like a random design play go to one of the other tight ends. For this game, we are getting an interesting under for Matt Collins, about a 53% chance for him to get under 31.5 receiving yards. We can see that's the highest number for any Falcons or for all of his props across sportsbooks, projections, and Underdog. Now, Matt Collins did see his snaps go up last week, about 10%, and he did have 60 yards receiving on 6 targets, 3 receptions. So I don't know. To me, that seems like a line that I would rather just stay away from. One prop bet that I have been going in on, they have since adjusted it, was actually Bijan Robinson. I think it started at like 66.5 or 67.5, and that was one that I felt comfortable with. Now that's at 70, I'm kind of just staying away from it. It's actually being favored for the under to be the bet. And honestly, I would say if you are betting on Robinson 4 and over, maybe just do combined rush and receiving yards when that becomes available. And then let's see, Kyle Pitts. Yeah, not exactly one you want to be going out of your way to make. Maybe if we get a receptions prop, that's something we can go with. Now looking at Detroit, Josh Reynolds here, 41.5 receiving yards. And this might be one in which if ASB is a little bit banged up, maybe you do just go with Josh Reynolds. Hope for the best. Hope that he is banged up. That way they have to make Reynolds more of a thing in that game. And I do expect him to still get around, like honestly, 80% of the snaps. And I feel like we did see a little bit of an uptick because we saw ASB be banged up. I kind of am expecting him to play 74, that Josh Reynolds is going to be the next guy up to play about that same amount of snaps. And if that occurs, then yes, I do like that over receiving yards. Doesn't feel like a lock and load, but it is a way in which if we get news that ASB is going to be banged up going into that game, we could actually see that Josh Reynolds line go up a little bit. It kind of happened as I'm recording this right now. We have the Thursday night game. I mentioned like Brandon Ayuk, even if he plays, Deebo Samuel's reception prop at 4.5 is a pretty good one, I would say. But there's a good chance that Brandon Ayuk sits this game and that line gets bumped, which is exactly what happened. That is something that could happen here as well. All right, now we got the Indianapolis Colts versus the Baltimore Ravens. We see an 8-point spread. Obviously, that's going to be because I don't want to say obviously, but Anthony Richardson probably going to be out in this game with a concussion. We will see. That's going to lead to Gardner Minshew getting a lot of work. Changes the offense dynamic there. And the Ravens looked much better last week. Week 1 was just a sloppy game for them, and they pulled it out. Classic Ravens win. The over and under for this game is set at 44.1. Obviously, both teams are kind of dealing with some injuries. Okay, Justice Hill actually currently questionable with a toe injury. If he sits, that's going to lead to Melvin Gordon getting some work. Probably Gus Edwards as well. But if they need a passing down back, it'll probably be Melvin Gordon, which isn't pretty. And honestly, it'll probably be Zay Flowers. Okay, they're probably going to work him in that way. And then looking at the Colts, yes, Anthony Richardson, we got to worry about him. But I want to talk about 2 players here for the Colts. I'll pull up the snaps first. So snap-wise, here we go. I just want to call this out first. We saw Pierce play all the snaps. Zach Moss played 98% of snaps. Michael Pittman played 98% of snaps. If this is going to occur, and even Josh Downs, 75% of snaps, if this is going to occur for these players and they're going to have low prop lines like they had the past couple of weeks, it is something to target. Now, I do want to mention this. I played a lot of Zach Moss in DFS last week, and it obviously worked out. It's a good matchup going against Houston. Like, we want to be targeting that. It did feel like a mistake watching the film because I'm like, dude, just hit the freaking hole. What are you doing? He like literally kept running into his lineman when he didn't need to. I'm like, you are making contact for no reason. Hit the hole, get 10 yards. Instead, you'd hit the hole and get his 5-yard average. Like, if there was a good NFL running back there, I should say a great NFL running back there, I think he's good. Don't get me wrong. I think his running style works and whatever. Good NFL running back, a great one goes off in that game, okay? That's more of a, like, let's pause on Zach Moss. He was playing a lot of snaps, and maybe this uses in the passing game is something that we look at, especially with Gardner Minshew there. I don't mind that. Maybe get like a 1.5 reception prop and we can bet the over there. But I don't think we want to be touching anything really with Zach Moss other than that, especially when we look at this matchup. Like, it's just not one that we want to be targeting. Now, they have given up 11 receptions to opposing running backs, so there we go. Maybe there is something there for Zach Moss reception-wise, if that prop even becomes available. Then the other player I just want to mention is Michael Pittman, guys. He had an awesome game. Nico Collins reminded me a lot of Michael Pittman, actually. 11 targets, 12 targets thus far. The yards were low in the last game against Houston, but 8 receptions. That's kind of the norm with him. Like, he's going to be heavily targeted and he's going to get his receptions. So that's another one. If we get like 3.5 for a reception, I probably am going to be taking that. Now, not the best matchup against Baltimore, but let's take a peek at those props that we were getting for them. Yeah, we're only getting Zach Moss. Okay, so that's kind of why I touch on it like that. I didn't know if it had updated since. No, just Zach Moss. So yeah, not touching that. Let's take a peek at Baltimore. Guys, Zay Flowers has looked super good. And I do want to call out this as well. Lamar Jackson just functions better as NFL quarterback with Mark Andrews there. I feel like we have a good enough sample size to say that. And I do think a way in which we could attack maybe this game prop betting wise is maybe looking at a little bit of passing. 2 receivers, they have given up 474 passing yards. The Colts have. So we got Zay Flowers there. That's probably the one we want to go on, but we know they do kind of use Mark Andrews a little bit as a tight end or as a receiver, and still, like the Colts, giving up a decent amount of work to tight ends as well. So we do see there's not a big edge there with these Mark Andrews props or even a Zay Flowers prop, basically a 50-50 split. The projection data actually likes Zay Flowers a little bit more. We look at the snap counts. This is kind of what you would expect there. 84, 77. Bateman actually saw his snaps increase a lot. That's mostly due to OBJ getting banged up. We obviously need to get news on Justice Hill because then it'll be very interesting. I do think we'll see actually Zay Jones just getting a little bit more unique work. They did actually get Devin Duvernay getting involved with some unique work. Like I kind of expect Zay Flowers to get, whether it be end arounds or, motioning into the backfield and maybe running a screen out, something like that. I don't hate this one, the touchdowns combo prop. But yeah, I honestly don't mind this as well. Over receiving yards for Zay Flowers, that one feels to me like an edge. Another one though, where EV betting wise, maybe not the best bet that we are getting, given the matchup, given how he's looked, given OBJ being banged up. It's something that makes sense. And obviously they don't really love Bateman too much there. All right, now moving on into the Carolina Panthers versus the Seattle Seahawks, a 42 over and under, with the Seahawks being favored by 6.5 points. The Seahawks, we aren't really waiting on any injury news just yet. The Carolina Panthers, Bryce Young is currently doubtful. Does that help or hurt the pass catchers? We don't really know, right? Like Andy Dalton being the quarterback, I would say it's not going to hurt. Just does it help? We'll see. Now, you'll think, given the matchup with the Seahawks, it very well could, because whether it's tight ends or receivers, this has been a matchup that you've been wanting to target. And maybe we actually get a good Andy Dalton one. That could be a sneaky good one. But all in all, this Seahawks defense has not been one that has been causing quarterbacks trouble. On the flip side of that, we have seen the Carolina Panthers give out a lot of rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. Kenneth Walker is one of those running backs that have gotten a bunch of touchdowns already. Maybe there's a good fantasy score prop that we can run out for Kenneth Walker. You're going to see some of his stats, Kenneth Walker's stats, rushing yards per carry. They're going to be down. That's because he has gotten a lot of short yardage carries, and he's been able to convert them. So it's not like a negative against them or against him. And for the Panthers, we are surprisingly getting a decent amount of props. Hayden Hurst, let's take a peek at this. I want to see his snap counts from last week if we're getting them. Okay, and we're not on lineups.com. Let's take a peek at RotoWire. Okay, so he only played in 55% of the snaps last week. That sucks because that's basically what he played in the first. I was going to say, if he played in 70% of the snaps, then we could probably go for the over receiving yards. He is someone that has looked good, but if he's not on the field, it's going to be tough to trust. And for what it's worth, these are the snap counts from last week. Jonathan Mingo ended up playing 98%, Miles Sanders 60, DJ Chark 58. You would expect that number for DJ Chark to go up a little bit as he gets another week healthy. Adam Thielen 87. Terrence Marshall saw a big drop with DJ Chark back. That's not too shocking, but let's see here. We were getting a decent prop on Jonathan Mingo. You don't expect him to really dominate, but this is one of those where maybe an underdog, if you wanted to bet the over, you could. I would say the under here is probably the way to go, but although playing that many snaps, like, come on, you need to get that over there. We do see Adam Thielen. He's probably going to be a popular bet just because a lot of people saw him on Monday Night Football. And if we get like a receptions prop, that could feel like a trap. Miles Sanders receiving yards 15. That feels low as well. I guess the chart's just telling us mostly to stay away. Now for Seattle's week 2 snap counts, we will see that Zach Charbonnet had a bit more work, 2% more work, I guess. But DJ Dallas actually saw significantly less, which I found kind of surprising. I thought DJ Dallas has looked good in the preseason and last week. So something to monitor there, but it hasn't come at the detriment of Kenneth Walker snaps. JSN playing about 60% of the snap. Will Disley 50% last week. Cody Parkinson 50%. Noah Fant 50%. So we're probably just staying away from any tight ends props there. And then really receiver wise, what you would expect from Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. So props here, we're getting Geno Smith for over rushing yards being one of the better prop bets that we are getting. Okay, 57 for an edge. I need to look at this one a little bit more. Let's look at the DVP. Let's look at rushing yards actually. Okay, so Geno Smith gets a matchup with the Panthers, who definitely have given up more rushing yards than a lot of teams. Not a terrible one there. Let's see his rush attempts. Geno Smith here, 3 rush attempts last week, 20 yards. Week 1 rush attempt, 6 yards. What is the line at? 14.5. That is a lot, though. I don't mind it, though. I don't mind it. Underdog has it set at 16.5. The sportsbooks have it set at 16.5. Could be an edge there. Passing touchdowns, will he throw for 2? I don't know. I probably don't want to touch that one, although we did see that this is probably a matchup that we want to be targeting. So you would kind of think he'd be able to throw for 2, especially with the weapons that he has there. All right, now moving on into the next game, we got the Dallas Cowboys versus the Arizona Cardinals, the biggest spread that we have had thus far this season, 13 points. The game over-under is pretty low, though, at 43.5. We did get news that Diggs is going to be out with a knee injury. Maybe that actually leads to us looking at a little bit of the pass catchers for the Arizona Cardinals. We will see. And I called that out because the Cardinals pass catchers looked good last week. I thought Marquise Brown should have had a better game in week 1, and then we saw him really pop off last week. That's why we watched film. That's why I was giving out those tidbits. he's someone that we could be looking at. Zach Ertz still heavily involved in the offense, still got a lot of targets in that one. He's someone where I already bet it over receptions prop for him, and I'll touch on that. Rondale Moore, he's someone that I think they should get more involved in the offense. And then no surprise there, Michael Wilson went from 90% of the snaps to 40% of the snaps. I don't know, that just felt a little forced. And until he shows us something, like, let's just not mess with that. James Conner, 72% of the snaps last week. And like, this team has not looked bad. And here we go. Marquise Brown over receiving yards. I don't mind this one. 41.5 on PrizePicks. I feel like we're getting more good props this week than we had last week at this time, but less lock, because this one feels like a good prop, because even if this game's a blowout, I do think he has a good chance to just be on the field that much. I would rather do a receptions prop for what it's worth. Like if it's 3.5 again, I think we could run with that one. We already saw Zach Ertz, what I was mentioning. My favorite prop for him was set at 3.5. That has since been bumped up to 4, so probably not touching that one. But yeah, maybe this matchup isn't as difficult as it seems with Diggs out. We'll see. And I will say, eventually the Dallas Cowboys are going to play a really good offense, and they're not going to be considered the best team. Maybe. We'll see. But they definitely have benefited from some really easy matchups or some poor offenses thus far. I still don't mind Zach Ertz receiving yards. He's just given targeted heavily. The only issue would be if this game gets out of hand too fast and like the garbage time production that we would typically see maybe occur just isn't there, because maybe they don't play a full quarter. That'd be the worry, but we can see targeted heavily. 8 and 10 targets thus far. I love the reception prop at 3.5 when it opened there. Now it's at 4. If it drops back down, maybe something you can target. And for what it's worth, shout out to Josh Dobbs. He's looked really impressive. Dak Prescott, yeah, over 1.5 passing touchdowns, probably something you can roll with there. So quarterback wise, I want to see, have the Cardinals given up a bunch of passing touchdowns? They haven't. I mean, 3. It's not terrible. Passing yards, they are a team that you can beat through the air. Let's look at running back wise. Nothing too crazy running back wise. Snap count wise, I do think that we are going to see kind of these numbers consistently. Maybe Jake Ferguson probably gets closer to 65% on average, but maybe Jalen Tolbert gets a little bit less there as well, I would say. But I do think it's about 70 to 80% for CeeDee Lamb will be the norm. We'll see maybe 70 to 65% for Tony Pollard. Obviously in closer game, we're going to start to see that stuff. Rico Dotto looked pretty good last week, but also so did Deuce Vaughn in limited work. Deuce Vaughn he looked good. Let's put it that way. I don't think that's going to change anything for Tony Pollard, but it's something I wanted to call out. So we jump back into the cheat sheet here. We can see we are getting a bunch of kind of interesting props for the Dallas Cowboys. I would say the best one would be Dak for over 1.5 passing touchdowns. You could go CeeDee Lamb for over 70. This is one of those where I kind of like it. He's going to get targeted heavily as long as the game, and let's pull this up, as long as the game doesn't, blow out too fast. Guys, this game against New York, the first game, just fluky because of 2 touchdowns by defenses, and he still got the over. CeeDee Lamb is one of the best talents in the league. Like, I'm writing this one down because I feel like that's just a good call. And then you could even pair it with Dak, 2 passing touchdowns. And then the last game on this slate, I will be covering the other games in a separate video here. We got the Chicago Bears versus the Kansas City Chiefs, another game that's expected to be ugly. Minus 2.5 for the Kansas City Chiefs to beat the Chicago Bears, 48 for an over and under. Isaiah Pacheco, currently questionable. Need to get news on him. If he's going to play or not, that could actually really change a lot. Kadarius Toney had another injury pop up. That's an interesting one to watch. And then Richie James as well, MCL. Like, it's weird. Like, Toney is their receiver number 1, although he's not playing that many snaps, because like when he's on the field, he gets heavily involved, but he's only playing about 30% of the snaps. And with him being banged up as well, like that production needs to go somewhere. And if Richie James is out, not practicing on Thursday, where is that production going to go? You would guess probably Sky Moore a little bit, had a much better game last week. Maybe Rice, but honestly, probably Justin Watson. Like, guys, if Justin Watson was on the New York Giants, they would love him there. What I mean by that, he's a good backup to have, and obviously the New York Giants love them some backup receivers as their starters. But whenever Watson takes the field, he looks good. And so we can see last week, we saw an increase in snaps. So if Toney's out, if Richie James is out, I kind of just expect those snaps to go his way. Sky Moore saw significantly less snaps last week, and what I predicted with Noah Gray, which felt like a lock last week for his over receiving yards, ended up being a lock. It ended up being the easiest prop bet. I wouldn't have found that if we weren't going through this game by game, and that's why I've been doing that. That I literally doubled my bankroll last week because of little finds like that. And so we saw snap counts go down from week 1, obviously with Travis Kelce being back, but he looked good. And given the fact that they gave Blake Bell 40% of the snaps in week 1, I thought that they would go to Noah Gray. I don't know if he's exactly going to get 61% of the snaps again this week, like he had in week too. But given how banged up they are, you kind of expect that to actually happen. Maybe 55%, maybe it comes down a little bit as Travis Kelce gets more snaps. But I do think Noah Gray, if we are getting another good line on him, will probably be a good one to target. We got MVS getting a lot of snaps. He is their actual receiver number one, just maybe not in production. They don't try to get him the ball unless he's open downfield. He'll get a downfield shot here and there, which might be important because this matchup with the Chicago Bears is one that you want to attack, whether it be with Pacheco, if he's active, or Jerick McKinnon. We will see. It's tough to say. I could see them, like, they don't want to give McKinnon a lot of work in week 1, in week 2, in week 3. Earlier on in the season, they don't. So actually, maybe CEH would be the guy there. That's an interesting thought. But yeah, I mean, you can really beat up on the Bears any way you see fit, especially with how banged up they are. They lost 2 of their members in the secondary. They're just depleted on defense, and their offense is terrible. Go figure, right? You have a quarterback that can't throw the ball accurately. Who would have thought? Actually, that was a hot take at the start of the season. And we aren't getting any Noah Gray props. They learned their lesson. But we will see that, Patrick Mahomes' rushing attempts. This is an interesting one. The over is heavily favored for the over there. Another good EV bet. We are getting a lot of good EV bets on the slate, actually. So let's be taking advantage of those. We got Travis Kelce for over receiving yards. If he gets a little bit more snaps, like I kind of think he will. Not a terrible one. And then from there, we're not getting that many ones that I really want to touch on. Pacheco, got to see if he's going to be active. I would say this. You could do this. Like if he's going to play a full allotment of snaps, which for him is about 50% of the snaps, this is going to be about 10 to 12 touches. And I will say their offense looked much better when they got Pacheco some work in the second half. Basically, all of his production came in the second half. Maybe that's something they saw on film, but obviously with him not practicing, it'd probably be stupid to make a prop bet like this. But at the same time, it could just end up being a DMP. And let's get into the Chicago Bears, see if we have any good Chicago props. So I do find these ones with Khalil Herbert and Johnson to be extremely interesting. They have clearly tried to get their running backs the ball in the passing game. And so I don't really get why Khalil Herbert's number is so low and why the under is being favored there. I mean, I get it. The Vegas line has said 8.5. This is another one where I'm like, bet the over on Vegas. Like, I don't get this. We literally saw them run 3 straight screenplays to him to get him the ball because they like him in space. 3 targets last week. Ended up taking one of those for a pretty big gain. 5 targets in week 1. Ended up taking those for a pretty big gain. Then we look at Johnson. He did get 2 targets as well. 7 targets in that second game. That was a blowout though. That's why he got the work. The snap counts will tell us that story. He did play in 42% of the snaps last week though, with Khalil Herbert playing 60%. Okay, so that's where I'm like, I don't know if I really agree with this. To me, I would almost say these should be flipped. But maybe, and this is the thought here, it's probably because they are saying it's going to be a blowout. Thus, Roschon Johnson might get a little bit more work. Maybe it's 45% of the snaps, and he probably will get those checkdowns. That is, I think that's the thought process there with the sports book. So personally, I think these make for better bets the opposite way on the sports books. But PrizePicks, if you guys want to run these out there, by all means, you could. I wouldn't blame you. Interesting one here for Darnell Mooney. 2.5 receptions. This is the over and under. That's looking like it's going to be a good EV bet. Now, he is currently questionable. Last week did not get a single target. And I would say that's due to his snaps were down 28%, and probably because of that injury. We saw Chase Claypool get 79%. Trent Taylor ended up with 43%. I would say the expectation would be, let's see what Trent Taylor did. He didn't get any targets. I would say the expectation would be that Darnell Mooney would actually probably get those snaps if he's healthy, and then those targets. Not terrible, not exactly one we need to be going out of our way for. Then from there, Justin Fields, man, over 1 points or over 171.5 passing yards. I don't know if I can do that. They just look so pitiful on offense. Now they get the Kansas City Chiefs, who really look good pass rushing. And maybe that causes Justin Fields to actually pull the ball a little bit faster, and he actually gets a few more rushing yards than he has been expected to get just because he's forced to. I don't know. I'm trying to draw a narrative there. All right. That is enough for the previews. Let's go and get into my favorite bets for week 3 as it sits right now. Just want to give you guys a reminder though, if you guys are interested in accessing any of these ODDSJAM tools, make sure to do that. They have a fantasy optimizer as well, which I'll touch on here. Let's see NFL. We'll sort by league. Just show you guys the best prop bets that are currently out there on the NFL slate as well. And why I like using this with mine is that we get some unique stats like this, like combo props. Those are nice. We got tackles and assist props. It's nice to be able to resort to those if we see the need to do that. But also you get access to that sportsbook sheet as well. If you guys want to join, make sure to use promo code 9to5. Also want to call, if you guys are still watching this video, make sure to give a like and subscribe. If you guys want access to any of my tools, they are available for just $10 a month. That includes the prop tools that you saw in this video, as well as NFL DFS tools, as well as PGA DFS tools. All right, let's go ahead and get into the bet of the day. All right, so here are my favorite bets for the week 3 main slate. We got Mike Williams for over 4.5 receptions. If he's going to be operating out of the slot like that, that's going to lead to a lot of easier receptions, especially if Austin Eckler is out. I do think that that could lead to at least one more reception to go to Mike Williams' way. I think he's going to see a lot of targets. I really like the matchup for Amari Cooper. You could also do over 4.5 receptions there, but this is a matchup-based play. Obviously, we worry about the groin injury a little bit, but it seems to be all right. He played a lot of snaps last week. Give him another week to get healthier, and that should be a good one. Obviously, good matchup play. Zay Jones, another one where it's going to be a good matchup-based thing. I do think there's a chance that they try to get him involved in some more unique ways if they are banged up at the running back position, if Justice Hill is out. I don't know if that would actually help him or hurt him with the receiving yards. I do think that would lead to more receptions for him, though. So maybe that's a prop that pops up as it progresses. But these are 3 really good matchup-based props that we are getting. And then we get into 2 EV bets. Josh Allen for over 1.5 passing touchdowns. And then we also have Patrick Mahomes for over 3.5 rushing attempts. Those are 2 of the best EV bets that we have available. You could also do Dak Prescott for over 1.5 passing touchdowns, which is another good EV bet. Another one that I personally like, just given the game, given how many targets he's going to get, given the amount of snaps he's get, is Courtland Sutton for over 3.5 receptions. The issue with basically all these ones that aren't EV bets, so let's just take these off, these 2 off. These 4 here is that they make for better bets on sports books because they're all favored about 50% or so chance to hit. That's the unfortunate side for these bets that I'm giving out on PrizePicks. They make for better individual bets on the sportsbook. So if you have that ability, do that. But if you guys only have the ability to play on PrizePicks or Underdog, these are the good bets. I also still do like Marquise Brown for over his receiving yards as well. That's going to be all for this video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the coverage. If you did, make sure to give a like and subscribe. Let's have a good slate. And as always, let's keep cashing.